eternity. Fear not, my God, I am thine eternally.
Well, good morning again, friends. My name's Bryan, and this is my brother, Guru Bhai, Swami Suryadas. We're very happy to be giving service with you this morning. I'm going to start with a reading from Rays of the One Light, which are weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriya-yoga. This week's topic is why do devotees fall? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. An endlessly fascinating question is, why did Judas fall after receiving the extraordinary blessing of being accepted into the inner circle of Jesus Christ's disciples? For Judas was one of the 12 apostles, yet he betrayed Jesus and earned for himself the opprobrium of Christendom for all futurity for his sins. We find Judas reprimanding Jesus just days before that betrayal. Jesus, aware that his disciples would soon be facing, with his death, the supreme tragedy of their lives, allowed Mary to express her devotion by anointing his feet with costly ointment. This act of wanton waste, as Judas saw it, awakened indignation in that disciple. Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This, he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and kept the purse and bare what was put therein. Then Jesus said, let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Doubt not the power of delusion. Respect it, indeed fear it, though not in the sense of cowering before it. For as Yogananda said, one is not safe until he attains nirvikalpa samadhi, the state of final union with God. Judas, through attachment to money, opened his consciousness to subtle influences, which may be called satanic, that drew his thoughts toward other related attitudes, the importance of worldly power, for instance, and of worldly influence. The Bhagavad Gita gives a graphic explanation of how easily the mind can be drawn downward once it begins to feed on wrong attitudes. In the second chapter, Sri Krishna states, if one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. From anger there arises infatuation. That is the delusion that one object alone is worth clinging to the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From forgetfulness of the higher self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty. And when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. At the first thought of delusion, Paramhansa Yogananda said, that is the time to stop it. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. About 3 months ago, I gave a class on balance and fall prevention, referring to physical falls. And I jokingly, half jokingly, gave a disclaimer at the start that I wasn't going to talk about spiritual falling, because I felt like I knew quite a bit, because of my work and profession, knew quite a bit more about physical falls and balance and the things that lead up to falls. So imagine my delight when I saw on this date that I got to talk about spiritual falls and how devotees fall. And actually, there's a fair amount of parallels between physical falls and spiritual falls. One that I think is important to recognize is that there are many variables or many factors that the trained eye can see on someone, or tests that we have validated that can help us predict falls. And there are many interventions that we can do that help us to reduce the risk of falling. I'm talking about physically. And I think it's so with a spiritual fall also. I might call some of the things along the way that lead up to a full-scale spiritual fall, you might think of them as slips or trips and not flat-out falls. And in fact, it's interesting to me that Swami writes about Judas here in one of those times where Judas had the wrong attitude, but he wasn't talking about Judas, wasn't referring to Judas having this monumental, complete abandonment of the spiritual life fall like he did when he betrayed Jesus to the authorities so that they could arrest him. So there's many things along the way. Attitudes are foremost among them, for us to learn right attitudes, to hold out to each other the right attitudes so that we don't slip towards having a fall. There's a nice collection, a fantastic collection of spiritual practices, of teachings that we can learn about in classes here. And they're sort of beyond the scope of a Sunday service. The Raja Yoga class, for example, the Kriya preparation class, even meditation classes, even yoga posture classes. They all teach things like the yamas and the niyamas, the sort of, not really 10 commandments, but the sort of ways of holding the right moral attitude so that you can begin to rise spiritually and prevent yourself from falling spiritually. Now, Yogananda gave us two really important updates to the legacy of Judas, the story of Judas. Because in Christianity, as referred to in the readings, Judas is presented as the worst thing that you could possibly be. That you're a traitor, you're betraying the trust of someone who is actually much higher than you spiritually, and you're thinking, my own ideas about this are probably more correct than the guru's idea about this. And, I know in early colonial America times, the word Judas was equivalent to kind of one of the biggest insults that you could say about someone, that you could accuse someone of being a Judas, meaning a betrayer. And it's a kind of a done deal because he's looked at as this pariah. But Yogananda, again, gave us a couple of updates about Judas. Number one, he tells us that Judas was a prophet. A prophet. Now we're talking about prophets in the old Hebrew sense. These are very, very high souls. And this is why, Yogananda's statement about you're never safe from being vulnerable to a fall until you reach nirvikalpa samadhi, this high state of final liberation. He says, essentially, he had to have been a prophet to be one of the 12 closest disciples of Jesus. The second thing that Yogananda offers us is the insight, the truth, that after 2,000 years, Judas was able to finally, in the last century, attain complete liberation. And he, in fact, Yogananda says, I knew Judas, didn't have that name in this lifetime, the most recent lifetime, and he knew his guru. Master was not his guru, but he knew his guru, and he met Judas. And he, Yogananda, asked Judas's guru to give him final liberation in that lifetime. So this is a really amazing couple of addendums, updates, perspective that move beyond this strict Christian interpretation of Judas being a done deal, essentially, that he's evil forever. And Master reminds us that the concept or the phenomenon of karma and the phenomenon of reincarnation are intricately tied. You can't have one without the other. And so if you are from a perspective of Christianity that reincarnation doesn't exist, this is a tough play to be acting out in, because if any of us have any slips or falls in our life, it feels irreparable. If we have a marriage that dissolves or breaks up, or we come to financial ruin, or we accidentally injure someone. This is a very hard thing to accept for most of us as devotees. Master is sort of famous for saying this quote that a saint is a sinner who never gave up. And Nelson Mandela actually said a very similar thing. He was, people were saying, you're so fantastic, you suffered under the apartheid regime, you were imprisoned for many years, and you rose to become the first, prime minister or president, I'm not sure the title, in South Africa. And Nelson Mandela says, well, people say I'm a saint, and I'm not a saint unless a saint is a sinner who keeps on trying. It's almost the exact same thing that Master said. Well, lately I've been trying to translate in my mind the word sin and sinner to simply mean karma. So if you think about a saint is a person with karma who never gave up, to me that feels much more accessible, because we all have karma. Karma is, one way to think of karma is unlearned lessons that we haven't quite learned yet. And we come to this earthly life, and our earthly life is kind of like a school. We hear this in Ananda a fair amount. This is a place to learn. We're trying to learn something. So all the stuff that happens to us, all the stuff that we do can be learned, can be seen as a lesson for reaching higher states of consciousness. I was watching a video recently of Vincent Tolman, who was a man who had a near-death experience. And he does a really nice job in this 30 or 40-minute video of describing some of the insights and describing the gates of pearls. It's worth a watch. And one of the things that he said he realized, so he grew up pretty strict Christian in Texas. And he felt like when he realized that he was approaching the pearly gates in heaven, he was sort of girding himself for judgment day. And he realized that there wasn't that going on during that experience. A lot of people who've had near-death experiences say the very similar thing, that they, especially if they were from a sort of a strict Christian background, they were sort of like, I was waiting for it to be judged. I was waiting to review my life and feel all these terrible things about it. But the one pearl that Vincent Tolman said was that he realized that this earthly life was a classroom, right? Not a courtroom. It was a classroom, not a courtroom. So I think that, again, the practices that we encourage with each other, that we give classes about, that we do readings from, the book studies that we do, all of those can give us tools to help us not slip, trip, or, heaven forbid, fall spiritually. There's a way in which we can think about ourselves not having a fall, but we also have this tremendous opportunity to treat ourselves in a way that God treats us, which is that, and again, these near-death experience people are saying that they are not feeling anything but pure and intense love and acceptance. You know, there's the line in the Festival of Light that we'll do in a few minutes. Early on in the festival, it says that in the past, sorrow and suffering were the coin of man's redemption. But the payment now has been exchanged for calm acceptance and joy. Calm acceptance and joy. You know, Judas was not calm when he was getting agitated in those weeks and days before what he misunderstood to be Christ's real mission. And I think he was trying to, I don't think his intentions were bad at all, but as is the case with a lot of us, it's kind of thing where you say, it seemed like a good idea at the time. So we have in this community, and I don't just mean our living community, but also our congregation, those of you who come, who put energy into being here, we have a really incredible opportunity to not only take on the challenge ourselves about how we treat ourselves when we slip, but also how to treat others. And it's really almost more imperative that we treat each other in a way that is kind of blind to our personalities and our difficulties that we see on each other. There's a story that makes me think of this that I told a few years ago at a service, but I'll tell it again. I think it's worth hearing again. And it's a story about a young man who's walking in a park, in a city park, and he sees an older gentleman sitting on a park bench that he recognizes. And he recognizes that he was his teacher when he was a young man, an adolescent. And he goes up to the man and he says, "Hello, I think you're Mr. So-and-so, and I think you were my teacher, and I recognize you. Do you recognize me?" And the older man says, "No, I don't recognize you, but that's great. what are you doing with your life? It might have been like in 8th grade or something, somewhere around there. And he said, well, the young man said, well, in fact, I'm a teacher too, and one of the reasons that I became a teacher was because of you, how you treated me. And he said, let me tell you the story and see if you remember it. And he said, I was in a very, very hard time in my life. I was stealing things, I was running with a bad crowd, an adolescent boy. I was angry at the world and cynical and kind of on a disastrous path. And he said one day a friend came into the class and he had a new watch. And it was a beautiful watch. And I decided that I needed to have that watch. I needed to have it for myself. And so he stole it out of his backpack or whatever. He stole the watch from his friend. And a little bit later, the friend realized that the watch was missing, and he said out loud and to the teacher, he said, my watch is missing, my new watch is missing. Somebody stole it. And so you, the teacher, closed the door to the classroom and had all of us stand in a circle facing outward and closed our eyes. Everybody had to close their eyes. And the teacher went around checking the pockets of all of the students that were standing in the circle. And the young man said, I could feel when you came to my pocket that you found the watch and you pulled it out. But then you continued on. You went the rest of the way around the circle. And then when you got to the end, you said, okay, everybody open your eyes, we've found the watch. And they returned it to this young man. And this young man said, you never scolded me, you never singled me out, you never asked me to stay after class. He said, it was the most shameful day of my life. And it was the day that you restored my dignity to me. It was also soon after that I decided that I would become a teacher. And I changed my life. I got on track. I quit doing this downward spiral. And the young man said to the older man, do you remember me? And the older man said, I remembered the incident with the watch, and I remember finding it and getting it back. But he said, I didn't know who had stole it because I closed my eyes too. This is the kind of way that I think we need to aspire to treating each other as fellow devotees. That we need to be blind to the personalities, the outward errors that we see each other making. Master said, do you really imagine that Jesus hated Judas? Because if you do, that's missing it. But we do that. We think that, and the culture kind of tends to think that. So whatever you are on the path, whatever brought you here to Sunday service or brought you online, whether or not you can get yourself to sit down and hold still and meditate, whether or not you can get into the chants, it doesn't matter, because all of us are at the place where we can be, like you read about, I am what I am. That's our starting point. And this acceptance of that This calm acceptance of that in each other is what we need to cultivate. And remember, Master's promise to us in his poem, God's Boatman. Master promised, he said, I will return 1 trillion times if need be, if one stray brother is left behind. 1 trillion times. He didn't say 1,000,000 times. He said, I will come 1 trillion times if need be, if one stray brother is weeping by the wayside. May we all hold this in our hearts with each other and towards each other. God bless. We'll have some choir music now in our offertory.
There lived a tender maid in a far-off country. The strangeness of this world made her sigh. Her friends asked their fathers for money and clothes, but all she could ask was, why? She saw the solemn clouds gathered watching a rainbow. The bright rays of their joy filled the sky. Her teachers explained it all wisely away, but still her heart wondered why. She saw the silent stars thrill the night with their gladness. They seemed some wondrous truth to imply. Her elders all slept by the magic of light, awoke her to ponder why. She saw a mother smile as she tended her baby, a widow weep that love had to die. The joy of new friends and the sadness of parting, all these made her ask God, why? One night into her heart stole the secret of oneness, the bond not even time can untie. For love then possessed her